Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Zero Hour. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and joining us once again, we haven't talked to him for a long time, is our old friend, Detroit political consultant, Sam Riddle. We got a couple things to talk about with you, Sam, so thanks a lot for joining us.
Well, fire away, RJ. It's always an honor to be on your show because you just keep raising hell day in and day out. My kind of guy.
Some people just get that gene, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I think the more we age, it gets stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
That's why we look at some of the youngsters with some teaspoon or two of disdain, but it's okay. It's all good.
Well, I guess that don't give an F thing sort of strengthens as you get older. But anyway, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. I guess I wanted to talk to you about three things, and I'll lay them out right in front, and then we'll just knock them down. Anything else that comes up, we can talk about that too. But number one, Baltimore. Number two, water. Number three, roads. Okay? And the reason why I wanted to start with Baltimore, Sam, a lot of reasons. Obviously, I want to get your thoughts on it. Obviously, our urban problem is a national problem. It's not a local problem. But also, that it'll help us segue into the water question, too, that you and I have talked about in the past. But, as you look upon the events in Baltimore from Detroit, what thoughts go through your mind?
Well, first of all, I go back to 1976. In 1976, I was an organizer with the Jimmy Carter for President campaign, and guess where I had an office? Right on Pennsylvania Avenue, in the heart of where the Baltimore uprising of this year was occurring. So nearly 40 years ago, 39 years ago, I had an office there. My claim to fame was that the office was never broken into, and the reason was that I simply put to work a lot of the folks in the neighborhood. They didn't make a lot of money, but they got some pocket change, and they protected that source of meager income that it might have been. And therein lies the rub, because a lot of people don't understand and don't want to understand the connection between the fact that urban America wallows in poverty. There is a direct connection between the uprising in Baltimore. And understand, when I say uprising, I'm not trying to be fashionable. I call it an uprising the same reason we talked about Detroit in 1967 when Detroit exploded. Anytime you have state-sanctioned violence against a people, then the people respond to that state-sanctioned violence. What is state-sanctioned violence? When the police feel they have carte blanche to beat you, lock you up without probable cause, even to shoot and kill you whenever they feel like it, the police feel like it, then that's state-sanctioned violence. When the people rise up against that, that is an uprising, not a mere riot destroying property. Again, one of the things I loved hearing coming out of grassroots Baltimore was the people saying, you care more about the door of a CVS than the broken back of Gray. I mean, right, Mr. Gray.
Absolutely. Okay. And I think another piece of that, too, and it's interesting, it struck me, this is the first time I've said this publicly, but it struck me, it was interesting that it was a CVS, because we're talking about a city, Baltimore, where the life expectancy in the poorest neighborhood is 20 years shorter than the life expectancy in the richest neighborhood. Now, that's violence, too, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about...
Absolutely. Lack of health care, lack of resources to even purchase the prescriptions is a form of violence against an underclass that then has to suffer the brunt of state-sanctioned violence through the police forces, which are even further militarized as if they believe that they're in a war zone, because the institutionalized hate and racism runs so deep. And that is to protect the property. And a lot of those law enforcement guys, policemen, killer cops, don't get it. They're there and in place and expendable to protect the property of the top 1% that could care less about these policemen and policewomen.
Right. Absolutely. No, I think that's absolutely true. And I've actually written about that too, that the people who are taking jobs in the police force, these are not the 1%. These are nor does the 1% have any particular interest in their well-being either. But, and of course, they'll tell you on the police force, well, Freddie Gray shouldn't have run. Well, who wouldn't run?
And RJ, something else, too. I posted this on my on my Facebook page as well as tweeted it. But when you look at those youngsters picking up what they could, throwing rocks, it brought back pictures of the Intifada in the Middle East as they threw rocks at the Israeli soldiers and whatnot. Soweto, back when all the youth had, the young folks had, were the rocks of resistance. And these uprisings are, in point of fact, resistance against state-sanctioned violence. I mean, Baltimore in 2015 is a manifestation of generations of malignant neglect. This is not benign neglect. I mean, we don't have, because of technology, we don't have the need for labor-intensive communities anymore. There's no need. The profit mongers have no need for the labor that Baltimore used to provide. That's why we had those row houses. They have no need for the labor that urban Detroit used to provide in car factories that are shuttered now in Detroit and Flint, Michigan. So what occurs is when people don't work, an underground economy does flourish. People do what they have to do to feed, clothe, and shelter themselves. And thus we have the incidence of violence and the mentality that says protect the top 1%'s property at all costs. I mean, you had Wolf Blitzer there sounding like he was auditioning for Fox News. He and that Cuomo guy are like, they're just pitiful the way they broadcast from CNN today, along with that Don Lemonhead.
Well, don't even get me started on that. But we're talking with a Detroit political consultant and our friend Sam Riddle. Hey, listen, Sam. Now, the one thing that occurs to me every time this happens, and it occurred to me with Baltimore too, is I'm amazed that there aren't these kinds of reactions all over the United States in our cities, because it seems to me conditions are so bad in so many different places. People say, well, why do you hear this implication, well, why do people react with such anger? I mean, there's a part of me that says, why are so many people? It's a testament to the goodwill of the residents of our inner city that this isn't happening everywhere. It seems to me people are extraordinarily patient, and I'm just wondering whether we're looking at a future where we'll see more and more and more Baltimores.
Well, I believe it could certainly happen. I mean, Detroit is ripe for that. I don't have to repeat the data to you. You know it. 60% of the children in Detroit live in poverty. There are 2 Detroits. While the PR machine of Dan Gilbert and Roger Penske churn out news of the new Detroit, the reality is that under this Republican governor, Snyder, who would like to be president of the United States of America, 60% of the children still live in poverty in Detroit. The infant mortality rate rivals that of third world nations. The unemployment rate is horrendous. The illiteracy rate in Detroit probably exceeds 50% now. It was 47% at the last official count. When we look at the fact that black women suffering from breast cancer have a 40% higher mortality rate than white women, the violence of poor education, joblessness, hunger, homelessness, those are all acts of violence, and it's state-sanctioned violence against the poor. We are now almost in a state of undeclared war between the haves and the have-nots, and the only weapon the have-nots really have are the rocks of despair. Did I say that? That's a little melodramatic. But anyway, that's my point.
I hear you. I hear what you're saying, absolutely. And we are also looking at a situation of, as you know, 2.5 times the rate of infant mortality for African Americans in this country, and on and on and on. That's what I'm
saying. Yeah.
So, I mean, we have neighborhoods in Baltimore with worse life expectancy statistics than North Korea. We have neighborhoods in Baltimore with worse infant mortality statistics than the West Bank. So
Yeah.
I get your point. I definitely hear what you're saying. And I guess here's something else that's going on in Baltimore, as you know, which is first of all, they just slipped through a 15% increase in the water rate. And then they're threatening 25,000 customers with shutting off their water. They also have a bunch of business customers, just like Detroit, just like you and I have talked about, that haven't paid their water bills either, but they're not threatening them. So we've got the same situation. And at the same time that this is going on, what do I read? I read that Detroit, after its moratorium on water shutoffs, is going back and starting them up again. Is that right?
Yeah, they're talking about 800 cutoff notices per day, starting right about now. And the water department is going to be hanging 800 notices per day on doors of homes in line for a shutoff. That's what the deputy water director, Daryl Latimer, told the Detroit Free Press last month. And, you know, the real crime here is that we don't have a water crisis so much as a poverty crisis. I mean, folks get into these payments and they don't have the income. They're not working. They can't make the payments, but they sign the agreements, hoping beyond hope that maybe some income that's not coming will come. So within a month or two after they sign the agreements, they're getting shut-off notices again because they can't afford to pay. And meantime, I want to make this connection. Billionaire Dan Gilbert here, owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers, as well as half of Detroit now, he has found himself in trouble with the feds for cases of fraud involving billions of dollars in fraudulent loans that his folks have cooked the books on. They would qualify people for housing loans. I understand the connection here. They couldn't afford the loans.
Right.
And then the people would default and the feds would make good on the loans because they insured them on the word of the businesses of Dan Gilbert that, you know, these were good credit risk when they knew full well they weren't. But instead of like Kwame Kilpatrick, who would have had a RICO Act thrown at him for this behavior, Dan Gilbert, because of the dual system of justice, gets the opportunity to pay a fine instead of doing time. So they qualify people for homes they can't pay for. They set folks up on water payments they can't pay for. They know full well the real crisis that has to be addressed in Baltimore and Detroit is the issue of wealth inequality in this nation. These water cutoffs are a manifestation of a poverty crisis, a crisis manufactured on the backs of wealth inequality in this nation, and no one wants to address that in a leadership position in this nation.
And you know well, Sam Riddle, that this is all. How do I put this? First of all, you know, you were the one who pointed out that the United Nations says access to health is a basic human right. So we're talking about
I wrote the first article on that right here in Detroit, right?
I remember. And so denial of that basic human right is an injustice in the eyes of the world, but it is part of this whole logic. Now, I'm going to do a segue on you, Sam, but I know I can't get anything past you, so I'll just say it up front.
Do what you do.
All right, here's my segue. Okay. But this whole business about water is the same thing. It's the philosophy, it's the ideology of privatization, of money talks. And now right there, you had a resolution, I believe your governor was a big part of it, to raise some money for road construction.
One of the biggest jokes, RJ, we've got a situation in Michigan. The state budget is $52 billion annually each fiscal year. They need 1.5, they say, to fix the roads. But there's a direct connection between there being no money to fix the roads and this top 1%er, Governor Snyder, who wants to be president, trying to saddle the middle class, the working class, and the poor with the burden of fixing those roads. Many Detroiters don't even have cars. They can't even use the roads.
Right.
So the 3/5 of Michigan that would have had to pay that new penny tax, they call it, to raise the state sales tax from 6 to 7%, that would have represented over 5% of the annual income, the top 3/5 of those paying it. For the bottom fifth, it would have represented 6%, over 6%. But guess what? for the top 1%, it would only represent less than 1%, 0.8% of their income. No, the situation we have here is that when Governor Snyder took office from 2011, he immediately cut the corporate tax of the wealthiest individuals from, I think, 67 to 80%. So the money that could have been used to pay for those Michigan roads, it lines the pockets of the governor's rich fat cat friends who want to saddle the working class with that debt, the working class and the poor with that debt. In Michigan, by an 80 to 20% voter rate, said no to the governor. Think about that. It was the largest rejection of a tax hike or a proposal ever seen in the state of Michigan. And the reason is that the people are not dumb. They know that this is a governor, Governor Snyder, that came into office cutting taxes for the rich and saddling the burden on the working class and the poor. And they saw through it. They rejected that tax on Tuesday, this past Tuesday, 80 to 20%. And now they've gone back to the drawing board. But until we...
Well, don't go on. Let's stop for a second, Sam. Let's just stop for a second and feel good. Let's just take a moment and feel good that this thing, and then move on, all right? Because 80%, that's a kick in the butt to this whole wealth grab that guys like the governor of Michigan have been leading for so many decades. They got their butt kicked because the people hate what they're doing, and everybody ought to know that.
Absolutely. And, you know, it does require breath because, again, the people of Michigan felt their power in terms of democracy working. But this is a governor who, when the people rejected the democracy-destroying emergency managers at the polling places, when they voted and rejected that, the governor and the Republican-controlled legislature went on and imposed emergency management on the predominantly black cities throughout Michigan anyway, even though the entirety of Michigan in a prior election had said no to that. So they'll come up with another scam to protect the pocketbooks of this governor's rich fat cat friends. And I just hope that the people continue to stand strong and start to turn out of office some of those people that reject democracy.
Well, it's like the man said. It's like the man said all those years ago. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And I'm glad we got you on the case out there in Detroit. And it's always great to talk to you, my friend, Sam Riddle.
Okay, RJ. Thanks so much.
You bet. Take care. And we will be right back after this. I'm RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.